All right, so vulnerability. What do you think, like, leaders, especially in the corporate world, need to do with vulnerability? Why vulnerability?
I think that, vulnerability, I think it's very, many people mistake vulnerability for weakness, and hence that they do not dare to be vulnerable at work, maybe even not at home, to be honest. And being vulnerable and just letting go of all this sort of, how do you say, the protection that you have, and letting people in makes everything that you need to build relationships and authenticity at work together with your colleagues as well. And that's the only way to create trust and a safe space, is then when you actually are able to drop the sort of, what do you call that? The guard? You feel guarded?
Yeah, you feel your guard, keeping your guard up.
Yeah. So that's my thought on, vulnerability. But I think that it can be hard, and in some situations and at some places it's difficult to use that, because you're afraid that someone will sort of stick a knife in your back because you're weak, instead of actually, boosting that part of you that is actually you. What do you think?
I think that, vulnerability is super important. For the main reason I think it's important is because, if we're out there and constantly taking risks, facing fear, and trying to do new and exciting things, then the only way to accept our failures and then to move on is to be vulnerable to them. So instead of fighting all of the things that are coming in, we're just letting them come in, and then we're trying to address them as they really arrive in us. And so I think that that's probably one of the things that's really important about vulnerability. Also, I think when you're vulnerable, you make a different connection with people.
Oh, yeah.
And I think if you have especially a brand that is open to change and movement and development, then I think it's really important to be vulnerable and express that in your leadership.
Yeah, and I know that both you and I, we have watched, the video from Brené Brown. Is one of the favorites. She's sort of, and you said it before, she's like owning the vulnerability.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you saw that the first time, what were your thoughts?
When I saw Brené Brown for the first time, I actually thought, not only, oh yeah, this is like interesting, but I really felt like it resonated with me that, all this time, especially kind of like as a man in business, I felt like, how much do you show of yourself? And I felt like I needed to like say, you know what, I'm just going to be who I am, and then see what emerges from that.
Yeah, and it works quite fine, right?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, but do you think that it is more, difficult for men in general to be vulnerable, or to dare to be vulnerable as leaders of today?
I think there are two things. One is the general conditioning in our society that, this whole story about, don't cry if you're a boy and all that kind of thing.
Right.
So that's like the kind of like, let's say, being vulnerable in front of other people.
Yeah.
But then also I think that traditionally many of the men that have made their ways into leadership positions now have gone through a time period when that was more accepted, right? So
Right.
I actually think that that right now it's much easier to be vulnerable, to be yourself. It's rewarded, or at least accepted and acknowledged by many people.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important step forward for businesses, especially as we take on more and more responsibility socially.
Yeah.
I think businesses are really replacing a lot of times government in taking social responsibility, and the only way for any of us to do that is through being vulnerable and showing our vulnerability.
Yeah, exactly. And just to connect with people. I know that we sort of we have quite a good connection, but I also believe that happened through being able to sort of let the guard down and be vulnerable about who we are, what our thoughts are, dreams, fears. There are a lot of stuff going on, right? So, and that creates something special. And I believe that if we could do that as leaders all the time, it would be so much better as well. And we are creating this trust and the safe space and allowance to be who you are, to do mistakes, and that creates innovation as well, right? You're allowed to be become who you want to be, right?
Yeah,
I'm floating away now. I sort of
be who you want to be. Yeah. No, but I think like in the toughest professions, I mean, I haven't been in the military, but I've listened to a lot of like Simon Sinek who talks about these kind of things, and he uses the references that he works a lot with the military, and specifically, although you think that there wouldn't be showing much vulnerability, actually there seems to be a lot of openness, because when you're really at the cold face of whatever it might be, whether it's business or athletes as well, you're really facing the physical and mental limitations. And when you come that close, you realize that you can't pretend, you can't keep that wall up, because there's actually things happening to you.
Yeah.
And so I think that I think basically it's like a shift. It's like a shift from being kind of, it's like that shift from being like middle manager to leader, right? Middle managers have that kind of, we're invulnerable, but leaders almost always are showing, the way forward, and they're doing that through showing who they really are, their vision, drive, determination, but also, getting people on board is all about like saying, hey, this is why we're doing this, is really important,
Exactly.
So yeah, I think that's true. I think, it's gone from middle managers are pretending not to be vulnerable, and I think leaders are increasingly vulnerable.
I can totally resonate with that as well, because I just looking into my past and my history as well, when taking the different steps in my career, that something happened when I actually dared to let the guard down. Something happened with the connection to my teams and to whatever we were working with the relationships, and again, that resonated as well with the results that we were making.
Yeah.
So that's a major shift.
Yeah, definitely. All right, thank you.
Cheers.